So far this morning, I've had a chocolate croissant, I've had coffee, and I've listened to papers on sex, marriage, adultery, desire, and lies. What better way to start a Friday, right? Now, to offer a comment for us on this wonderful panel, Jennifer Heuer is here. She received her PhD from the University of Chicago and is currently associate professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Rather than going through the extensive list of accolades, I would like to get to your comments, so please come up.
Okay, microphone is good? Excellent. I'm delighted to be commenting on these three very interesting, I think, closely connected papers. And I'll talk about them in the fortunate order they appear, because I think both Andrea Mantzker's and Anne Verjeu's paper address different aspects of matchmaking and the nature of marriage in the early 19th century, and especially the Napoleonic Restoration era. And then Judith de Groot's work on Pauline Roland, Wooing Without Marriage, takes us conveniently to both the slightly later period, the 1830s to the 1850s, and looks at contemporary challenges to marriage. All three address not just the experience, the nature of marriage, but also how people talked about it publicly within a wider cultural imaginary, whether in a matchmaker's commercial presentation of his life and goals, in the plots of popular theater, or in how people talked about or avoided talking about Roland's rejection of marriage. All three also raise the question of chance and of choice, of who makes the choice to wed or not to wed, why and how. So to start with Andrea Mantzker's Marriage and the Politics of Police Repression, she looks at the fascinating character of Claude Villaume, the founder of a well-known matrimonial agency in Napoleonic and Restoration France, and connects the question of matchmaking within his agency to Villaume's accounts of his own life, and especially his imprisonment and suffering at the hands of Napoleon's government. And one of the things I find really intriguing about this is your analysis of fortune and the theme of destiny. He presents matchmaking as an apolitical activity chosen in reaction to political persecutions under Napoleon, emphasizes the role of chance in bringing together couples, especially as individuals whose lives were disrupted by political and social turmoil, and the role of fortune in his own victimization and suffering. And I was thinking about how he plays down his active role in matchmaker to emphasize fortune, even as he's advertising his agency, claiming just to be a confidential transmission point. And you mentioned that does this in part to emphasize the respectable nature of the unions rather than any kind of charlatanism or trickery. I was wondering how he deals with the question of the role of other intermediaries, and especially in connection with Anne's work and noting the play Matrimony, what role, if any, parents play in this, as to whether any contacted Villaume, came to his agency, placed ads, whether he touches at all on the need or desire for parental approval and how that plays out. If that's a prominent theme, I'd be interested to hear more. If it's not, it makes a rather distinctive counterpoint to the theatrical world that Anne is talking about, in which parental approval is absolutely necessary, even if parents can be confused about what's really in the child's best interest. I was also curious to see a bit more about the relationships between the question of secrecy or kind of privacy inherent in sentimental relations and marriage negotiations with the publicity or the intervention that's sort of inherent in marketing a matrimonial agency and deliberately and repeatedly telling his life story. And I was wondering if you could say a bit more about what, if any, information is known about his clients, the extent to which he actually, I was seeing Jennifer Jones' article in Courrier de Limon, which is a few years earlier in 1791, noting the kind of information that's available about people, profession, income, property, to the extent to which you have any sense of sort of who people are if you don't know their names, but who they are in terms of their social status or background. I was struck by the degree to which he offered his own companion, Happy Marriage, as an example, and I'm curious if he ever mentions other happy marriages, other sort of successful unions, whether he claims success in bringing them together or not. And finally, I was curious to know a bit more about the dynamics of gender, which I think I should talk about more in a longer paper, both in how he describes matrimonial arrangements, his clients, etc., and in how he kind of relates his own life. And I turn to Anne Verjus' La Comédie du mariage d'amour arrangé. She's looking at the sort of curious phenomena of arranged love marriages, which seems at first glance inherently contradictory. Builds her analysis today on a corpus of popular plays from the Napoleonic era and the early Restoration, which she emphasizes seems to be a distinctive genre within France, and proposes that we're seeing a literary discourse about marriage emerging between Rousseau's 1761, Nouvelle Louise, and Georges Sand's novels in the 1830s, that is an interesting sort of hybrid or transitional moment. I'm going to indulge for just a moment in talking about my own research, and specifically in light of wondering more about the characters in the play. I've looked at a few popular plays from the Napoleonic period, the beginning of Restoration, usually celebrating peace treaties, which have stock characters, usually a young woman who's loyal to a soldier, someone named Belle France, or goes to war with a good heart, or Mr. Courageous, who's been absent for a long time without news. We're starting to wonder what's happened to him, and whose parents want her to marry a war profiteer, so think someone like rapacious, or a rich coward, frivolous, fatuous and everything, often a toy maker or in a profession like that. And in those plays, we see concerns about whether fathers can force their daughter's hands, usually because they promise a daughter's hand in marriage in payment for a debt. But it's often the mothers who are socially ambitious too, who think that the civilian suitor offers opportunities for social advancement. Now, of course, in all these plays, true love wins out. Rosalie marries the Belle France. A general comes and magically kind of gives him money because it turns out that his life is being saved, and all ends well. Anyhow, you're not looking at quite the same corpus, but there's a lot of overlap in the period. And I'm curious to whether you're seeing certain kinds of characters as recurring, and if so, if they're sort of better or worse suited for marriage. You mentioned the question of mésalliance and mismarriage, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, and also about the role of mothers. And you note the importance of, or the fear about paternal authoritarianism, and the question of wanting paternal consent but not wanting parents or fathers to force marriages, and what role there is here of mothers in looking for suitors or preventing them. As I was listening, I was reminded, I swear there's a British writer who talks about chambre à part in the period, but I can't remember who. So if anybody in the audience strikes a bell, perhaps you could mention that after the comment, because I'm the same period, I'm sure there's somebody, I just can't remember the name. Then I want to also turn to this question of fortune or chance, which Andrea talks about. And it strikes me in these plays that fortune is always good, which is partly the nature of comedies. Everything always ends well. But also that a lot of the plays play up the limits of chance or fortune. In other words, you need a couple's, there's often a test of love, as you talk about. A couple needs to kind of actively consent and to be together and to prove their affection for each other, as well as needing parental consent. So fortune plays a role or a beginning, but is, it's a beginning. It's not the end of the story. Then I want to turn us to Judith de Groot's Doing Without Marriage, Pauline Roland's lived challenge to bourgeois domesticity, which shows in a very fascinating way how Roland was inspired and constrained by gender roles, argues that Roland took seriously the Saint-Simonian theory of serial monogamy, raised children on her own, that when she was brought before the law, she was defined by authorities and press, primarily by, or perhaps even exclusively by her anti-marriage stance, rather than other aspects of her politics. Conversely, after her death in Algeria, she's presented as a martyred mother and playing down her political activism. And I was thinking about how Andrea frames or talks about how Villon fashions his narrative and emphasizing fortune. Villon turns to matchmaking because it seems to be safely apolitical. For Roland, the decision to reject marriage is deeply political and is seen as such by contemporaries. As I mentioned, I was struck by the emphasis Villon places on fortune in bringing together couples and in the vagaries of history. And it seems like Pauline Roland really emphasizes the opposite, the question of choice. Choice in partners, choice in not marrying. See a lack of control in an individual's life in terms of what happens if a woman does marry and forfeits control to her husband and the legal construction of marriage in the period. You mentioned actually that she sees marriage as unnecessary. I wonder if you actually want to make a stronger argument than that, not just unnecessary, but dangerous or problematic. I also wonder how much she addresses the question of unpredictability or lack of control in other circumstances, from supposed love at first sight that Anne touches on as a literary trope, to the various political upheavals of the 19th century, including the circumstances that lead to her arrest and imprisonment. Another perhaps not so much question, but sort of thought that emerged as I was listening to you, is the role of religion. And you emphasize that in her concerns about the dangerous remains of Christianity. I love the anecdote of her persuading the nuns not to go to Mass. It's not at all a prominent part of either Andrea's story or of Anne's, and I think that's partly a question of sources. Religion just doesn't play much of a role in theater. But it is part of the code of construction of marriage in the period. And I'm thinking especially, for example, of the abolition of divorce when the Restoration government comes back into power. And I'm kind of curious if any of you have any sort of thoughts on the role of religion in these sort of different constructions of marriage and love in the period. May not, but I'll throw it out there. And one other comment on Roland. I was wondering if you know anything about her family's reactions to her choices, especially her sister and her mother. Struck the ways in which she writes letters to sort of Saint-Simonian leaders and talking about different kinds of family bonds, and the extent to which she herself is emphasizing other family bonds, even if she rejects marriage as an institution. All right, I think I'll stop there and open it up to the audience.
A few minutes for questions for our wonderful panel. First, shall we see if there are responses to anything that Judith has said, or Jennifer has said, sorry. You want to take questions instead? Questions it is. Because it's being recorded, we have a microphone that we'll ask you to pass around. There isn't any volume in here, but as you're speaking into it, be aware you're being recorded. So you're sort of talking in a vacuum. Questions?
Hi, I was wondering if
Technology is so not perfect.
Hello, hello. Oh, this one? Okay. So I was wondering if the coup de foudre or chance is a way of and the third presentation made me think of this as a way of kind of negotiating or dispelling the female sexuality in the moment of within the model of loving marriage, because it's confined to this moment of mutual attraction that automatically leads to marriage. Because in some ways it seems like there's this model of that comes close to mutual marriage, but female choice doesn't play a huge part in the equation. And I was sort of thinking about this because Pauline Roland, it seems what's so threatening about her is not that she rejects marriage, but that she rejects marriage but actualizes her sexuality at the same time. So I just wondered what the first two panelists thought about chance versus female choice.
In terms of Guillaume and his advertising, I do talk about this in the kind of chapter that this paper is a part of, in terms of his kind of gendering and who he was really kind of trying to market to. And he is very much about this kind of illusion of marital choice, right? But especially for these kind of middle-class men who seem to be circulating in the city now, in these kind of anonymous spaces. And so he positions his office as one of these anonymous spaces where, if, for example, he wants to set you up with someone, he's found you a match, and you would prefer to see that person first. But again, there's the secretive nature of it that Jennifer was talking about, and so he doesn't want to reveal your identities to one another. Well, you can both come by his office on a given day. He has a lot of people there, not just for marital matches, but for all of his other business that he's doing there, right? So no one will know why you are there. No one will know your identities. How many people are actually at his office is kind of a question, but this seems to me is very much marketed toward men, and men having this kind of sexual fantasy in some ways play out in either his office or in the theater, which again, you don't know one another's identities. The woman is there. She can also see the man, before deciding whether she wants to take it any further. But I think he's a little bit ambiguous in terms of, how much choice do women really have? And should I market more toward the families, right? Won't it be the families who are coming to me to try to make a match for their daughter? So I think that he kind of downplays the idea of female sexuality, and I think there's something to what you're saying.
Sounds like a previous version of swipe left, swipe right.
Yeah, yes, definitely.
Other questions? You have to wait for the
All right. These are some great papers. This is a great panel. I enjoyed it very much. There's some interesting themes emerging here across panels too. So, for instance, in terms of a kind of new history of the impact of conscription, we have Jennifer's malingering, as even the comment on Claire's malingering tomorrow, and Jennifer's marriage as embedded, let's say, in this kind of histories of the revolution, so lots of patterns. But I want to ask Anne and Andrea a couple of questions here. And I do think these ways, what is fortune? Fortune is putting sort of the equivalent of online dating, right? But on the other hand, it's really a very structured way of entering into that arrangement, and the way that you're talking about it now, where you both go to the office and wonder which one of those people is the one. I mean, is there some sort of secret system of all these men in the office, like the one that you're looking at is this one? I mean, it's, but also, I'm interested, Jennifer raised the question about the parents, but I'm so struck by especially the women who might enter into this. And you talk there about men having a kind of sexual fantasy. So I wonder if you can know more about after the initial office visit, inspection, did any of these go anywhere? We have a friend who did online dating. She had 51 first dates before she had a second one. And so the sort of the way in which this structures a certain kind of not necessarily monogamous outcome, but a different kind of intimate relationship or fantasy intimate relationship, whatever. I'm interested in that. And you make these plays sound so much fun. I'm sure if I sat down to read these, I'd be like, but you make them sound like we'd all love to rush over and listen. I want to ask you, though, if you know anything, even in terms of newspaper articles, about what people watching made of this, that is, did they think, like, this is what's happening now, it resonates, or did they think, ha, 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 do you know what I mean? Did they take them, something that's happened doesn't happen anymore? Do you know what I mean? I wonder if you can know anything about those two things.
Well, just to speak very briefly to your question for me, in terms of the online dating literature today, or the scholarship, is kind of positing that now you have so many choices, right? And when you find somebody, finally, when you find somebody through online dating, how long is that relationship actually going to last? Because it's always in the back of your mind that there are all these other people out there, and do I really have the kind of best deal? And I do think there's some of that going on here, because he's clearly trying to titillate his male audience, right? So come in, you can just see the person, and if you don't like what you see, you will never know the names of one another, right? Your identities will remain kind of elusive. And so I think that, this, it's very hard to tell what kind of results. He claims that he has made many marriages, and there are other contemporaries who testify to that. Yet, yes, he does make a lot of marriages, although people don't want to admit it, right? And so it truly is, for a few years there, at least, this sense of la matrimoniomanie in the capital, at least, everyone seems to be talking about his office and marriages.
Okay, about public, well, I do not know yet. I just have guesses. And when I read the correspondences, there is not much of a comment on the theaters they go to, so I have no idea what they think. And as long as for the newspapers, it's the same. I mean, as long as I know, because I'm just starting a new project. So as long as I know, there's nothing about what the play is about. It's more about the structure, about how the actor and the actresses were good or not good, and it's not really about. And it's very disappointing, because you cannot find that kind of judgment on the plays. So I'm sorry not to answer your question. As for someone. I just want to jump on another question about the choice, the female choice. And it's very striking to see that it seems that in this place, okay, just in this short corpus, which is similarly the same as Jennifer, the question is about the choice, having the choice or not. And what is striking is that it's different from the 1830s, when George Sand is going to ask the condition of the choice, when she's going to say, okay, you think as a woman that you have a choice. And she takes her own example, because she got married in 1822 with Casimir Dudevant, and she thought that she had the choice, because she was, her mother wouldn't decide, her grandmother was dead, and she said, okay, you seems to be a good boy, so I'm going to choose you. And so it's typical of these years, I think, because it's about the illusion of having the choice, and this is a kind of fortune and stuff like that. And in 1830s, in her novels, she's going to say, okay, you think you have the choice, but in fact, as long as you don't know nothing about sexuality, you cannot say that you know how to choose the good husband. And what is in this plays, it kind of appears in this plays because most of the time when there is a good marriage, it's when it's a widow. She knows about marriage, and now she is conscious, and she knows how to choose. She has the knowledge to make a good marriage. So you see, you have the illusion of having the possibility to choose, and in the years coming, then you'll have Stendhal and Sand who are going to say, okay, just be careful because you think you're free, but you're just a little, how do you say, noix blanche in French? You had no education, you know nothing about sexuality, so just be careful. So it's just kind of.
Used to hearing the students do swipe right, and look at people, but I'm struck by how much this is an intellectual choice based on facts about an individual rather than a visual representation, which I find very interesting, a very different way of interacting.
Yes, when you look at the novels of Georges Sand, like take Mauprat that she writes in the 1830s, it's about the sentimental education of a future husband. It takes 7 years. And in all of her novels, you find it the difficulty to learn to a man, because in the novels of Georges Sand, it's always the woman who is in the top of the morality and the philosophy and the accomplished human being. She's always on the top. And then she takes the man from nothing and she elevates him to the state of the good husband, but it takes time. And it's in the 1830s.
Again, plus ça change. I think, Jennifer, you had a comment.
I was just going to say, the plays, if you look at censors' records, which are before a play was performed, it's very clear that they know how artificial this is. They talk about how it's kind of obligatory that plays end with a happy marriage, how bad the literary qualities are. They're very explicit about that. There's some wonderful lines about how this is absolute dreck and schlock, but it'll be popular anyway. So I think that there's clearly a sense that this doesn't quite map onto reality. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes. Can we pass the thing?
Okay, thank you so much for this wonderful panel. I really, really enjoyed it. One thing that I started to think about just hearing the papers was the sense, the degree to which marriage becomes bureaucratized. And I wondered some of the issues that Anne's paper raised about who gets to decide the question of marriage. And then I wondered about how in terms of whether the office that was described in the first paper, if not these offices to some degree offer a solution to those problems. I mean, the paperwork, the location of the office, is that a sort of modern way of dealing with that ancient old question of who makes the decision about the marriage, how to find a solution? I don't know. That was a thought that I had. And I also just want to say how much I enjoyed Pauline Roland. What a great presence. She made me very happy. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, I think that he's trying to offer a solution to everyone, right? That he is marketing toward women, he's marketing toward men, and trying to give people what they want. And so, yes, he does have, and this is kind of partly in response to Jennifer's earlier question, yes, he does advertise towards parents as well, and he takes great pride in saying that, a lot of times I'm just a center point. So that essentially, these are two marriages between two families. The families come to me, and then we figure out how we're going to arrange some kind of family function or a ball where the couple meets without really knowing that the families are behind it. And so I hardly figure in those marriages at all, and a lot of people are getting married without even knowing that there was a matrimonial agent involved
Wait, so you
whatsoever.
wake up married? Yes. What was it in the Marie Sang de Savoie? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
On Savoie, yes.
I'm sure there are more questions, but I'm mindful of the time as well, and that there are other panels to get to. So I think that we should probably stop there, and we can continue this after the fact. Thank you very much for a wonderful panel.
Thank you all for your questions.